So we haven't had the opportunity to have a lot of guests on our podcast. Both Marcus and I are very excited to have John here with us today. John is with Charitable Impact based out of Vancouver, and he's going to be talking about donor-advised funds and the state of philanthropy in current days, and what clients, advisors, and charities, how we can all work together to give better. So with that, John, please go ahead, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Justin, Marcus. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Charitable Impact is a donor advised fund, and our purpose is to work with donors to help them achieve their giving journey. And I think the thing to focus on is that when you're a donor advised fund, and certainly the perspective we come from, is that we're interested in the donor achieving what they want to achieve, right? So we're not here to sort of say, hey, here's a really important charity, you should give to it. It's kind of more about exploring who they are, why they're giving, what they're trying to achieve from it, and then help them along the way.
So, welcome, John. I looked a little bit into your background. So prior to starting Charitable Impact, you were with RBC Capital Markets, I believe, and with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Is that right? So
that's right.
Background in finance.
Background in finance. Yeah.
Did you do an accounting degree or get a CFA or anything like that?
No, I studied commerce. I went to McGill, studied commerce out of Montreal, and
good school.
Met a lady who's now my wife. So stayed and looked for a job in Montreal, despite being from Vancouver. I'm a West Coast boy. And was lucky to find a job with PricewaterhouseCoopers, focused in on finance because I wasn't really interested in pursuing the accounting degree. However, in hindsight, man, what an important thing to understand well. So maybe I should have done that, but went the finance route, focused a lot on valuations, company mechanics, what companies are worth, why they're worth that. Learned actually that it's a pretty subjective issue, which I found very interesting, and continued along in corporate finance until I kind of happenstanced into crossing the street. Well, I consider it still a financial street, but crossing the street to the other side to focus more on the nonprofit and giving side of the world.
Yeah, and Charitable Impact seems to really kind of bridge that street, essentially, or create a pedway, or as Justin would call it, a plus 15, right? Across that street, from finance to charity. Was there anything while you were working there in high finance in Montreal, or wherever you were, that sort of had you thinking about, it's kind of motivated you to into this field that you're in now?
No, actually, or if it was, it would kind of be my displeasure a little bit with just some of my what I was doing, where I was finding myself. Actually, not the work. I loved the work, loved the people I was working with, but just knowing myself, kind of going, am I in the right spot here? And so when I left RBC Capital Markets, I actually did a few things that I found interesting. I went back to school, studied art history, focused in on a different area than business, and eventually started getting into conversations with my dad, and my dad, which is natural. But my dad happens to be, well, he's retired now, but happened to be one of the pioneers of charity law. And so as I started talking more with him, and I had left RBC as I was pursuing other opportunities, one thing led to the next, and I started taking on projects with him. And a few years later, I was moving back to Vancouver to work more closely with him. And a few years after that, I was heading down the path of starting Charitable Impact.
Cool. So did you start this together, or this was your own baby?
Well, I would say it's my own baby, but I'd say that I wouldn't know how to raise a baby, at least a charitable baby, if it wasn't for him. So,
Yeah, for sure.
Charitable Impact was, my idea. I mean, I'm sure he would agree with this. It was my idea. It was my vision. It was my interest. But thanks to him and the many years that I worked with him, I had the literacy or the fluency in charitable giving, whether it was law or compliance or fundraising, all of the different mechanics of the world where you facilitate charity to sort of understand how to go down the road. And so for me, starting Charitable Impact was actually a lot more about finding the right question to ask than it was finding the answer to the question. Because I was fluent in finance and then becoming more and more fluent in the charitable world, I knew the answers, but I didn't always know what question to ask. And so some of the genesis of Charitable Impact was figuring out, what question ultimately to ask, and that's what led us to the donor advice fund.
So you're just saying that your father kind of helped build charity law, and kind of broadly speaking, the philanthropic space in Canada, is it nascent? Is it mature? Are things constantly evolving? Tax laws change as well, but broadly speaking, why did you not exist? Why did an organization like this maybe exist like 30 years ago, or did they? And am I just ignorant? Yeah.
That's a really cool question. Thanks for asking that. I would personally consider the charitable world to be relatively nascent, but it's important to define what aspect of the charitable world I'm talking about. So let's start with what I'm not talking about. What I'm not talking about is, the sort of human spirit of charity. And I'm also not talking about charitable activities. So people going out there and doing activities that help in the world of quote charity, right? If people are hungry, you give them food. If people are sick, you give them medicine. People need education, you teach them how to read, whatever, right? So those activities of charity have been going on since time started. And so charity at that level is not nascent at all. Where I believe charity is more nascent is in the sort of professionalization of the charitable sector, particularly as it relates to facilitating charitable giving to happen, right? So, tax laws with regard to giving are relatively nascent. Structures like private foundations and or donor advice funds are relatively nascent. And now when I say relatively nascent, I'm talking about 100 years old. But when you compare that to even in the finance world, things like banks, which is, I guess, somewhat relatively nascent too, sure. But it's still much newer, right? So I'd say that's an aspect, and it continues to evolve, albeit slowly. And then commenting on the donor advice fund, donor advice funds have actually been around for about 100 years. Arguably started out of the United States for reasons that maybe I won't get into unless you're really interested. But in short, had to do with what donor advice funds are still relevant for today, which is giving the donor a tool that works for them, right? So like a private foundation, but something that's a little bit easier to access and manage. So despite the fact donor advice funds aren't nascent per se, if you really kind of know your history and how they evolved, they're still completely unknown, particularly in Canada. So, my view on donor advised funds is like, you have a bank account, and you have a bank account because it's like this useful tool to administer your economic life. So if you're a donor, if you choose to give of your time or talent and treasure, to share with other things, ideas that you're interested in, why wouldn't you have your own account for managing that aspect of your life? That's how I see the donor advised fund, and that's why we started Charitable Impact. Actually, was just going out there and going, why are there no tools built for donors? Right? There's lots of charities that are raising money for their causes as they see them, being important as they are. But who's out there working for the donor? And what I referred to earlier when I said, I knew the answer to the question, but I didn't know what question to ask. The question ultimately, within reason, I asked myself, simplifying it a little bit, was, where do people go to get objective help, guidance with their charitable giving? That's not going to push them towards, whatever the, one specific charity might be selling. Right. And the ultimate answer to that was a donor advised fund being the tool, kind of like the bank account as a tool. And then the services wrapped around that being like the human knowledge sources and some of the technology that we add in today in this modern era that help people plot their own path, make their own decisions about charitable giving, but with the help of tools and people who, know what they're talking about.
Can we talk a little bit about the mechanics of a donor advised fund? For example, when it comes to what's quite popular with these is donating securities. And I don't know, as a financial planner, I can go a little bit into the tax weeds of it if you want, or if you want to sort of take that on, John, kind of give the listener, because we already talked about a bunch about donor advised funds, but like, what is that? I've never heard that word before. What exactly is that?
Well, Marcus, I'll let you go into all the weeds you want to go into, and I'll follow you in if you'd like. But why don't we start high level? So the mechanics of a donor advised fund. I mean, really important question. So what's really important about the donor advised fund, the key benefit that a donor gets is that it enables them to separate the two things that happen in every one charitable donation if you give it directly to the end using charity, like your church or the hospital or the homeless shelter in your neighborhood, your university, whatever you're into supporting. Okay, there's two things going on at that moment for the donor, even though we kind of see it as one. The first thing that happens is that they separate themselves from their money. Okay, let's call that the donation. And the second thing that's happening in that transaction is they're choosing where to allocate it. Like, oh, I want it to go to my church, or I want it to go to my mosque or my university or whatever end using charity, right? So the donor advised fund takes those two things and it empowers the donor to pull those two things apart and separate them if they want, right? And what that enables is it makes a more complicated decision less complicated, because there's two decisions instead of one. And by focusing in on, a smaller amount of data, humans often make better decisions. So you donate first into the donor advised fund and you get the tax receipt right away.
Yep.
That money can then be held there. I mean, it can even be invested, which is why we work with people like you, right? Mm-hmm. And then separately, when the person managing that donor advised fund is ready, they can go, oh, this is the charity I want it to go to. I also want some to go to this charity and that charity. And then I want to keep some for next week or next month or next year when I want to make more decisions, right? So the mechanics of the donor advised fund are donate first, take the tax receipt. So that's where all the planning can happen, like giving publicly traded securities instead of cash for real tax reasons, right? Beneficial tax reasons. And then separating that from going, what impact do I really want to have with this money that I've given away? What do I care about creating change for? And what organizations am I going to support when it comes to carrying out that change that I want to create? So at a high level, that's the mechanic. And I think that's really, really important, particularly for the type of person who is committing to philanthropy, whether for tax reasons or for religious reasons or for personal reasons. Right? They have their own tool. They put money in. They take the tax sheet and they think separately about how to best use that money.
I think behind the scenes, kind of what's happening too, and people kind of got to wrap their heads around, is donating to a donor advised fund like Charitable Impact. Charitable Impact is itself a charitable trust. We donate money or securities to it and get a tax receipt for that, and then you have that ability to then to transfer that to another charitable trust. So I put the money in, and maybe I want to do monthly contribution. Maybe it's a year in and I've got a stock. Maybe, in Justin's case, probably some of that Constellation software that you own that's appreciated so much. You want to donate that, get your charitable contribution, and then make that decision, which might be something you might want to think more about holistically. Who do you want to donate this to? How do you want to spread it out across your charities that you like, right? And that you can do by transferring. And the technology perspective, this is something that I really like, is it removes a friction. And I have the same with the Rotary Club I'm involved with, where we use Canada Helps in order to solicit donations, get them in, because they really reduce that friction that anybody can just come along with a credit card, put their information in, make a donation. Canada Helps takes that contribution and they transfer it to us. We don't have to do any of the receipting or anything like that. Now, we don't like paying the percentage to them, but if it means getting that contribution where otherwise that person might say, I don't want to write a check or do an email money transfer, it's too much trouble. That's the wonder of it. And again, I think with financial planning around charitable giving, this reduces some frictions, right?
That's exactly right. And, thanks for bringing up Canada Helps. Excellent organization. If you're a charity out there, you should look into them. They're awesome. Where Charitable Impact is different is when you put the money into, you donate into something that feels like your own account,
A
And
savings
then you can
account, yeah.
see, then you can see that
Yeah.
money. You can see that as a balance, like in kind of like a bank account that's just for charitable giving. And then you can kind of go, do I want to send this to Rotary, or do I want to send this to, somewhere else, right? Whereas what Canada Helps does is it, in my view, it really works for the charity, and it helps
Yep.
them get donations online easily. So that makes the donor's life easily. But in my view, it's built for the charity, whereas Charitable Impact is built for the donor. So I'm a big fan of Canada Helps. People actually, just as an aside, do you compete with Canada Helps? I mean, if you want, you can answer that either way. But my answer is generally no. Like, we're a donor advised fund. We work for the donor. We give them their own account. We help them manage their giving along the way. Whereas Canada Helps really works for the charities and makes it easier for people to give to them. And we work for the donor and make it easier for people to give to charities of their choice. So it sounds the same, but it's actually quite different.
I think there's a few things in terms of, like personal budgeting. You'll budget for your rent or your utilities or what have you. Call it like a subscription-based sort of idea, right? But you as a donor can say, okay, I'd like to consistently sock away $10, whatever the number might be, and say, okay, and I'm going to accrue it into this donor advised fund. And when an appropriate time comes, and like, okay, then there's that annual run that I like donating to, or there's that that thing that my neighbor is involved in. I'll do it. That happens once a year. It's not a then I can kind of redirect that money in that sense too. So it's almost like in some ways a budgeting tool to donate. I find my kids, we have these three little jars, right? We have like a giving jar, a saving jar, and a spending jar. And hopefully, they're, a couple dollars here, a couple dollars here, right? But then that giving jar at some point needs to be given, right? And I think that's one way I look at my own donor advised fund. I've had one for a number of years now, and you have some clients in it as well. And it's just, it makes sure that they're thinking about that cause, because sometimes, or their causes, because sometimes donations are ad hoc, somebody just knocking on your door, and sometimes you actually want to be meaningfully scheduling whether event or just making sure that you're doing it right and you're not searching for your wallet.
100%. I couldn't agree more with all. I mean, I love all that. And whether you want to be ad hoc or you want to be proactive, I mean, that's up to the donor, right? But either way, whether you spend money at the last minute at the grocery store or you go in there with a list, you still need a bank account, right? So either way, I would argue that having a donor advisor and having a tool for you to help you manage your giving is essential.
One thing you just mentioned about, previously with with technology, and Marcus, you alluded to it as well. One thing I also realized that around holiday season, the Salvation Army, the bowl, now you can just do tap, right? You don't even have to give into the bucket, right? So,
again, reduces frictions.
Exactly. And you're trying to, technology is coming into more and more as a functional tool. And you have a website, you have an app, I suppose that just helps reduce things. Does it may improve things on both sides, on the donor side as well as the charitable side as well?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is meant to be it helps on both sides. I mean, our focus is primarily on the donor, so the vast majority of our technological work goes into supporting the donors. And yeah, it is about reducing friction. My perspective on reducing friction, maybe without going too philosophical, is about making it as easy as possible for the donor to spend their time in the right areas when they're giving, right? So for example, a right area would be thinking more deeply about like what cause you care about, why you care about that cause, and then spending more time thinking about what organizations, what charities you want to support that relate to that cause. Time that's less valuable would be like trying to find your tax receipts at the year end, like going through your email, trying to find them, right? Inefficiently, searching Google to find a charity only to discover later that it's either not a registered charity or it's an American charity or something like that, right? So like search tools that are only looking at, registered charities in Canada, give you information about them, what type of charity are they, what do their financials look like, things like that, right? So my perspective is the purpose of the technology is to give the tools to the donor so they can spend their time more wisely. And when they spend their time more wisely along the lines I just talked about, you actually find, in my experience, is that donors enjoy their giving more. And because they take more responsibility for it, because they kind of go, oh yeah, like I really thought about that. I did choose that charity, whether it was good or bad. They learn from it better, and so ultimately they actually become a better donor more quickly.
Well, I really like that part of your technology, that research ability. So every charity, and this includes in the case of the Rotary Club I'm involved in, they have a charitable trust. They have to file annually, and it all goes onto a federal website, which I assume you scrape that information from, right, and put it on there. So when the donor is navigating on your platform, you can look up the various charities and see, similar to a Charity Navigator site like that. See what their financials look like.
Correct. Yeah. And one of the benefits there for the donor, is, it's a registered charity in Canada, right? It's
confirms
what
that,
nerds would call a qualified donee, right? Whereas someone knocks on your door, they might tell you you're a charity, but they might not be a charity, right? Or, if you want the tax receipt, I mean, it's important to support nonprofits, but nonprofits aren't registered charities. They're not going to get you a tax receipt.
Going back to sort of a little bit of the technicals of a donor advised fund, if the listener might think hearing this conversation so far, is this like, I mean, we're talking about a donor advised fund almost as if it is kind of like having your own foundation, which it sort of is, right? But do I have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this, or tens of thousands? What does it really look like technically? Can I start with can I start putting a few $100s aside, a few $1,000s aside? What does that look like on your platform?
Yeah, so great question, Marcus. Let's break that into two parts. So first of all, it is like having your own foundation, okay? And why I focus on like is, if you have your own foundation, without spending too much time here, it's you're creating your own nonprofit corporation, you're sending it to Ottawa for registration, it becomes a registered charity. Okay, so your own foundation is literally its own qualified donee, it's a corporation, it takes time to set up, it costs money, you got to manage it. And that's the context in which, people kind of go, well, what's the minimum amount I should donate in order to start a foundation? I mean, there's no black and white answer to that, but it's relatively big, probably, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to the donor advised fund, you have an account under the umbrella of an existing registered charity, right? So all the administration goes away. It's fast and it's cheap to start. So it's actually the donor advised fund's own policy that will answer your question of how much money do I need to start a donor advised fund. Some donor advised funds in Canada, the amounts are as high as, $250,000, $25,000, $10,000 in order to start a donor advised fund. At Charitable Impact, the answer is you don't even need to make a donation. That's because we believe that everyone is a philanthropist, and everyone deserves the right to have access to sophisticated giving tools, regardless of how much money they give away. Now, you might say, well, how can you be a donor if you don't give any money away? I mean, it's actually a good question, but let me give you an example. It's intuitive once you hear it, but it's counterintuitive on the surface. So we were talking about kids earlier. It sounds like, Justin, you have kids. I don't know, Marcus, if you do, but I have kids. And so my kids are now 12 and 14. Makes me feel old when I say that. There's some truth to that. And my partner and I, like we put money into our own, giving accounts. And then we actually started a donor advised fund for them at Charitable Impact. And we give them every month a charitable allowance by transferring money from our account over to theirs. So now I've got two kids, both of whom have donor advised funds, who have never donated their own money into it. Okay. Who now log into their own account when they choose to and go, hey, how am I going to spend this money, right? So, and then this starts to get you into applications of donor advised funds in other areas, right? So in my view, if everyone has a donor advised fund, you can start to use charitable dollars as a currency to kind of be like, hey, thanks for joining, CG, in our group of CG, here's money for you. And part of the value of our group is to match the donations you make, regardless of what charities you choose to give to. And donor advised funds, especially when you've got technology behind them, enable that to happen in a really effective way.
Really, all it is basically you have that account. It's not an investment account. It's just an online account. You're just paying your money in with a credit card. You have some money, however much you want to put in there, and then you decide where to give it to. And there's your very basic foundation just for you.
That's exactly right, Marcus. And then if you just to go back to some of those tax weeds without necessarily going into the weeds, you can use your credit card and, give $10 a month or $100 a month, whatever you choose, or you can go, you know what, I want to give publicly traded securities, because when I give
Yeah.
securities, the tax benefit is higher for me, right? Because of the capital gains exclusion, something I'm sure, Marcus, you could go deep on. But, so then you can say, so the donor gets to choose how they want to fund their account. Should I use cash? Do I want to do it monthly in a recurring donation? Do I want to do it quarterly? Do I want to do it once a year? Or do I want to use publicly traded securities? Same thing. Do I want to give it monthly? Do I want to do it quarterly? Do I want to do it when Justin chooses to sell his highly appreciated, stocks and donate then? If you're listening to this and you've got publicly traded securities that have appreciated in value and you want to be charitable, donate your publicly traded securities and not your cash.
Yeah, it's almost a no-brainer. Eh?
Yeah,
it is a no-brainer.
I think someone was telling me, the only side that loses out in some ways is the government, because they don't get the tax. they don't get the tax roll from it.
Sure, but it's also the government that put those rules into place.
Yes,
right?
exactly,
So,
right. So charity gets more, donor gets to give more. Win-win-win-win, right? And those rules are put in place for those reasons.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's just talk about those tax rules here for a second, and how extremely generous the governments are combined in Alberta here. We have a really great tax regime for charity. One, because we actually have a 75% tax credit on the first $200 that you donate per year. I don't know if you knew about that, John. I know in BC you don't get quite that. And then it works out to 50% on the excess, a little bit more if you're in the highest income tax bracket. So the way it would work so that's one thing. We have a really generous tax credit for charitable contributions. And then I think in Canada versus even most other countries, we have one of the most generous types of, legislation around donating appreciated securities. I think the US has a similar rule, but I don't think they're fully exempt from all capital gains on it, or how it works exactly. But here in Canada, when you donate appreciated securities, you're getting a tax credit for the full market value at the time you're contributing it. And your capital gains, the tax on your capital gains are completely omitted. Yeah, you're still giving something away where if you want to be greedy and keep the money for yourself, you'd sell the stock, pay the capital gains tax, and you've got some money in your pocket. But you could also take that full market value, have it go into a donor advised fund, or just donate it directly to a charity if you want. But if you have it go to a donor advised fund, you can continue to own the shares in there or rebalance it in a different type of portfolio. But that now belongs to Charitable Impact. You've gotten your tax credit for the donation, you don't pay your capital gains, and that full value of those shares can now go to your charities of choice, or you let it grow in there for a while, and then an even larger amount can go to your charities. Mm-hmm. So if you're donating anyways, it's a no-brainer.
That's absolutely right, Marcus. The only thing I'd add to that is that's why, first of all, it's super valuable to work with people like you when it comes to charitable giving, because then you can also combine, selling a stock to end up with money in your pocket with charitable giving, so as to offset some of the tax, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer to give publicly traded securities to fund your charitable giving, as opposed to using cash to donate. And back to one of the benefits of the donor advised fund is we'll take securities as fluently as we'll take credit cards online, right? And so it's super easy to do. And then, working with professionals like you guys, you'll sell those securities, at the donor's recommendation. Mm-hmm. And, when we're sort of like, yeah, let's do it. And then you're sitting on cash, and that can be given away easily, right? So every charity in the country is allowed to take publicly traded securities, but not every charity in the country knows how to get it done.
It's really set up, yeah.
Back to the tools that are focused on the donors, like let's make it easy for them to give their money away, and then let's get cash out to the end using charities who, generally speaking, need cash.
And the technicals behind that too is really Charitable Impact has the account with Canaccord Genuity in our case, and you probably work with a couple of other investment dealers too, right? But when you're donating shares to Charitable Impact, you're basically just transferring from one Canaccord account to another. Basically, a charity, as long as they can open an account with any type of investment dealer, they can do that and accept those appreciated securities, which can include mutual funds, ETFs, all sorts of things that are up in value from their base cost.
That's right.
You had mentioned children. I just wanted to go back to that example about the charitable allowances. You can also give them to not your children, people not your children, like friends, right? And I think that's an interesting snowballing effect, right? So taking that concept, can you explain a little bit of how you can give money within your giving account to a friend, and then they can then give it to theirs? Because sometimes you'll see like, oh, you go to a wedding, we've got everything we need, give it to this guy, or like maybe give them the gift of a donation or something of that nature, right? So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for asking that question. So what's really important to start with is that when you give money to charitable dollars for someone else, they can't take that out and go buy a Ferrari or a Slurpee at 7-Eleven, right? It just transfers into their own giving account, and then they can give it away from there, right? So, I use charitable dollars for all sorts of things now. Like I went out for dinner with a friend the other day, and they insisted on paying for dinner, and they wouldn't accept any help with it. And so I went home and I sent them 50 charitable dollars. I said, thanks so much for dinner, that was awesome, loved seeing you. Here's $50 for you to give away to something you care about. Hey, happy birthday. Don't know what to give you. Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah, right? You brought up weddings, and we have all sorts of people who set up weddings as a donor advised fund. We have a crowdfunding tool called a Giving Group. It's like a fundraising page. They set it up and say, look, like if you want to give us a toaster, please do, or you can choose to give to our charity page over here. And what's cool about that is instead of the married couple who's like, I can remember getting married, I was, so overwhelmed, I guess both emotionally, but also with the busyness of it, right? You got family and friends in town, you got all this setup to do. It's not necessarily the right time to be thinking about, well, which one charity should we give to, right? Yeah. Everyone allocates money into a donor advised fund. You can go away on your honeymoon, have a great time, come back, see, I don't know, a couple $1,000 in an account, go, hey, how do we want to use this money as a couple to give away? But what's cool about, recognizing charitable dollars as a currency is how you can use them in life, right? And one of my mindsets on that is, or hypotheses on that is, how can charitable dollars be used to develop donors, right? So I'm trying to give my kids charitable allowance to give them the experience of giving money away, right? And hope it sticks. I want that for people that work with us too. I want them to understand giving and not, hey, our company has decided that this is the charity everyone should give to. I mean, there's a time and a place for that. But how about just you can be your own person and give to what you want, and the company you work for is going to support you in that, right? The way companies, for example, that want to run corporate giving programs make that easy to do is by partnering with a donor advised fund.
On the topic of giving that charitable gift, as for a Christmas present, I have made a donation. Just had me thinking back on the Seinfeld episode where George Costanza invents the human fund. And so he basically gives everyone Christmas cards saying a donation has been made on your behalf to the human fund. And it all kind of backfires when his boss wanted to then donate $20,000 to the human fund, and there's no real charity. So this is the real legit way of doing this, where you can actually create accounts for your friends or clients or whatever on Charitable Impact, and give that money, and then say, hey, this was really given to you. You have different charities than I'm not going to have you donate money to Rotary. I'm not going to make a donation to Rotary on your behalf, but you go ahead and give to whatever really matters to you. And you can give that to any charity in Canada.
So I love the George Costanza shout out. That's hilarious. But
I think we're all about the same age, so we know we watched Seinfeld in the 90s. Right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, but the point you ended on, Marcus, is the really important one. Like, and I think it's just worth repeating. So, like, you're a fan of the Rotary. That's awesome. If I love, I don't know, animal welfare, okay, something that the Rotary doesn't do to my knowledge, then
that's one that we're not on. Yep.
When you make a donation to the Rotary and say, hey, John, happy birthday, I made a donation on your behalf, there's that's awesome. That's better than nothing. Okay. But it's way cooler for you to give me the money and then me to go, hey, Marcus, I was able to support like my favorite charity, which I don't know, it's helping homeless dogs or whatever, thanks to you. Right. And so often historically, we kind of, hey, I made a donation to my favorite charity of choice for your birthday. Right. But that's not the way we give gifts normally. It's like, hey, I bought you my favorite gift. I do that with my kids now that they're getting older. It's like, oh, you want those golf clubs? Oh, okay, I'll use them.
That's right.
Okay, but so it should be about, look, I'm giving to you for you to support what you care about, and that's where the meaning comes in. And the donor advised fund facilitates that. It makes it super easy to do.
Just talking about kids now, and then trying to build that habit of donating or being charitable and thinking about those things. Just broadly speaking, demographically, generationally, has the philanthropic charitable world seen like some differences from boomer, Gen X, millennials?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of good news here. In Canada, I mean, the data's pretty much the same in the United States too, for what it's worth. Fewer people are giving charitably.
They can't afford to, right?
Well, we can talk about that too, but fewer people are just to start the data, fewer people are giving charitably. And those who are giving charitably are giving a smaller percentage of their income. So the question is why, right? And Marcus, maybe it is that they can't afford to, okay? But I would argue that it's because they haven't really been taught or exposed to giving. The reason I say that is because, when you go into the data, lots and lots of people who are of a very small means give lots of money away. And just as by way of example, I mean, there's all sorts of people that, religious people in particular, this is where the data is very clear, who are not well off, but they go to church every week, or they go to their mosque, whatever they're into, and they tithe, or they pay their, so they're doing that out of, in this context, a religious obligation, right? They've been taught about giving, they believe in giving, it's in their religious texts, and they do it because they choose to. Right. So are they giving so much money away that they can't afford food? In most cases, no. Okay. But they're still giving. And there's all sorts of people of pretty substantive means who still are affected by the cost of living, of course, but who don't give. And the question is why. And in my experience, it's because they've never really been exposed to it before. They really never have valued it. Right. And I think an important analogy here, the one that I like, because I've got a lot of sport in my background, is like, staying fit. It's like, all sorts of people who have the time, to go for a run or go to the gym or do something that serves their, mental and physical health, don't do it. Even though it's, science says it's good.
It's just not a habit.
It's just not a habit. It's just, that's right. So I really worry about like where people are exposed to learn about giving. It's actually one of the big motivations behind the charitable allowance. It's a hypothesis that if we expose more kids to giving, they will grow up to do it. And a lot of research suggests that that's true. And so why the donor advised fund for that type of thing? Because I think it's important for people to give to and learn about giving, that they can give to the things they care most about, right? So if you're really into animals, please give to support animals. If you're really into the environment, please give to support the environment. And you grow up learning that, like, with these things that you love in life, you can actually, create change to keep them around, right? And so I'm really focused on and very interested in how you develop donors, and it's actually because I think it's really good for people to participate in charitable giving, and it's also good for the cause to fund causes that need money, but I think it's really important and interesting to look at it through a bit more of a selfish lens and kind of go like, gee, like, how is my life and how is my existence kind of made better by me participating in things that I really care about and taking some time and talent and money of mine and contributing it towards the things that I care about and participating in community in that way, right? You help community, and that's where the charitable world's focused all the time. I think it's also important to turn around and kind of go, but how do we help the people in the community? And donors when you meet people who give, they kind of go like, you know what, to be honest, I give because it's as good for me as it is for the causes that I give to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So much of it is habits, and we've talked about this in the past in terms of financial planning. When it comes to investing too, saving and investing, it's not about shooting the lights out on picking the right stocks. It's also not about kind of forcing yourself to save so and so much, follow a financial plan to a T, but so much of it is just really forming the right habits, avoiding the bad habits. And if you can do that, you can be successful financially. And when it comes to being a good benefactor, a lot of that is really just, if something can help you form the right habits, like we were talking about, making regular contributions into something, grease the wheels through some technology, some financial technology. I think it's all wonderful stuff.
Preaching to the choir here, Marcus.
Yeah, I know. So rapid fire questions.
I'll start off with that. Maybe that one
Why don't
specific question to John.
You start with them, and
you mentioned public securities and cash and whatnot. I do know that you have received other more unique or esoteric type investments. Can you give an example of something that was, I don't call it left field, but something that was a little bit different that you're able to handle, whereas some other organizations wouldn't or could not?
Well, I think the key there is what other organizations aren't able or keen to handle. In the esoteric sense, we took a bunch of Ethereum and Bitcoin a number of years ago when it was relatively new. So that's the type of thing that when you have the bit more of the charity bank mindset, you get there and go, oh, it's this new asset class. It's valuable, meaning you can put a value on it. It's liquid, you can sell it. So, we took it in and sold it right away. We didn't hold it. And the donor was really happy and tons of charities benefited. So we're going to be faster, generally speaking, to get to those types of places, I think, to adopt new things like that. But, the rules of donation and charity law still apply.
Sure.
A different example that I don't consider esoteric, but lots of charities don't take them, is private company shares. Right. So, hey, you've got a holding company, you want to, use that as your donation asset. No problem. It's just a little bit more complicated than giving publicly traded securities for reasons that private company shares are harder to value. Right. So you have to go through a valuation process, determine what it's worth so you can issue the tax receipt at a proper value. That's the first complicated part. The second complicated part is that you have to be able to generate cash from those, right? So either it's a dividend or something like that, or
schedule.
A redemption schedule often. Just because there's no public market or for those types of shares. But so Charitable Impact does deal in private company shares. You don't see it often, but we see it way more often than most. And it's a really important. Yeah, it's a really important asset class to give. But it's just a little bit more complicated than publicly traded securities, and certainly more complicated than cash because it can't be spent right away.
Okay. Okay, so rapid fire questions for you, John. I'll ask Justin too, and then Justin, you can ask me the same questions if you want. First charity you ever donated money to, if you can remember it.
I can't remember. I can remember my first giving story, but I can't.
First one you remember donating money to.
Well, how about first charity board that I remember really? I was living in Montreal and just graduated from university. I sat on a board of a women's shelter, and that I really enjoyed because it was a cause I had never really been exposed to.
Oh, interesting. And Justin?
As a child, Halloween, UNICEF, putting the coins in the boxes, going door to door. And to this day, I still give to UNICEF. So that's something that I got on as a kid way back. And that was one of the first charities that you see. Well, at least with school and Halloween. Marcus,
you've got a better memory than me, Justin.
That's probably also a good way. Yeah, a good way to get kids used to, donating to a good cause. Yeah. Now that you mention it, that's probably the first thing I ever donated to or raised money for as well. But like as an adult, getting a tax receipt, it's probably, it's hard to really remember. First things I really donated to, sadly, are political parties in the early days, because back then, that was the way to get a 75% tax credit. You got a much lower one on, but then they equalized that here in Alberta. They both get 75% of the first $200. But otherwise, it's usually typically I was probably something like United Way when I was working at the bank. But anyways, yeah, second question, the cause that's closest to you right now. Can I guess it's got to do with dogs or pets?
No, I mean, the cause that's closest to me, you lots of people don't take this as a cause, but I'm super interested and focused on how you develop a charitable society, like a society that actually participates in giving. So that's my cause of choice, and I actually work in it as well.
Yeah, Justin.
The last thing I donated through my donor advised fund was my children's school playground fund. So they have a new playground,
cool.
Partially because of that, and now years of children can use that playground, and I can see it myself, and it's tangible too, right? So, yep. and then by extension, Marcus knows this, but I used to spend quite a number of hours in years with Special Olympics.
Yeah, I think you know my answer. It's Rotary. I mean, I'm in the cult. In a way. But no, it is actually, looking at Charity Navigator, as well as looking at when I look up the Rotary Foundation Canada on Charitable Impact. They're very well run. Because most of the money gets basically used by volunteers, not so much paying people you're not paying scientists to cure cancer. You've got money going towards all these different causes that Rotary's involved in, which is I'm not going to list all the 7 areas of focus. It's a little bit of an oxymoron that they call it 7 areas of focus. But in the Rotary world, the things that really matter to me a lot is anything to help children. Because, if you can sort of provide opportunity, the rest flows from there. So myself, I've gone to Belize now 10 times to build playgrounds. And a lot of that comes on the back of some charitable donations to both Rotary and some other organizations to fund those playground builds. And that just creates a better school environment for kids in a third world country. So stuff like that really matters to me. Next question, a book or podcast that inspired your thinking on philanthropy. Maybe how it originally inspired you, or how it maybe has changed you over the years. Can you think of anything like that? Or a person, perhaps?
I should have done this before, but yeah, go ahead, John.
No,
Put you on the spot, John.
Okay. Because I'm so heavily involved in the charitable space, I find my inspiration outside of the charitable space. And so most recently, I've been doing a lot of reading on behavioral economics. And while that doesn't sound like,
that's just what we're talking
related, about. So I've read a couple. I'm bad at remembering the names of them. I'd have to go to my Audible account and tell you exactly what they were. But I've read a couple books that have really helped my thinking with regard to people and how they behave with regard to money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And mine would have to be, and I'm trying to find the author, but it was the 3 buckets for the kids, the spend, save, share system, and how to incorporate all of those into financial awareness for children, or helping them to be aware of their dollars and what they do. So maybe I'll put in the show notes and the footnotes, but yes, that would have been the book or the author that comes to mind.
Yeah. I was thinking about this when I came up with the question. I don't really know exactly who said this. It was from some podcast, and the either the interviewer or the interviewee was saying what matters more, I think, is it's not the dollar amount that you donate, but like what do those dollars mean to you specifically? And like what I mean literally is, if you're having a hard time making ends meet, and you feel so strongly about a particular charity, you can donate $200 of your money to that. That means a whole ton of a lot more than like an NHLer donating $10,000. And so that has me thinking, and we talk about this in the Rotary world too, people are of different means. It's awesome when, in some African country, people are donating some money and time and effort into whatever great cause they're doing. It is just so inspirational seeing that versus, there's a lot of very rich people here in North America that are part of Rotary that donate thousands, tens of thousands a year. Anyways, next question was, what's the biggest misconception people have about charitable giving?
There's a few big ones. One is that you have to be wealthy in order to be a
Exactly.
philanthropist. I mean, it's
Mhm.
and Marcus, you just spoke to that very well. I mean, you do not have to be
If you,
rich to participate in moving causes that you care about forward.
if you're in Alberta and you know that you're getting 75% of the money back anyways, take advantage of that $200 every year. Make sure you and your wife, if you can afford it, if you can afford that, make sure you and your wife, your spouse are putting that money to a good cause.
I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be dollars. It could be an hour a week, an hour, a couple hours a month, whatever the case may be. Put in your time. A lot of organizations are desperately short of volunteers.
It means a ton. Some months ago, I helped out some organization. I'm not really directly involved with them, doing 50-50 tickets at an Oilers game. And I actually
a lot of volunteers for that.
I like the experience of being in the building during a hockey game and selling those tickets. But yeah, there are some organizations, they get the right to sell tickets for a game, and they raise some money, not a lot. It turns out, I think a lot of the money goes with the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation, but they have that ability to raise some money, but they really need those volunteers. And actually, they reached out to my Rotary Club to try to find volunteers. I was the only one that could make it. And in that process, I met some other people who themselves, they were not tied to anything, not any type of service organization, but they just basically look for volunteer opportunities. And I think that's great. And if you know where to look, contact whatever local service groups there are in your community. They're always looking for someone. I don't know how to answer that one any better than you two have, so I'll kind of go on to the next one.
Okay, last one.
Last question, number 6. What is one piece of advice you give to someone who wants to start giving today? Say it's a young person and they haven't had that benefit of having a father that kind of sort of helped them form those habits early on, but they're just thinking about finally giving some money back. John, what's your bit of advice?
So the first piece of advice is just start. It's like the advice you give to an entrepreneur, or, it's just like, you have to start.
Just start saving.
So don't worry about the mistakes you'll make. Just start making those mistakes, start going now. The second piece of advice I'd give is focus in on something that you love, right? And briefly, the reason for that is because it's easier to be a more effective donor when you know something about the cause you're giving to, right? So are charities efficient or not? That's a big question, though, going down that rabbit hole. People who are giving to things that they're more familiar with already because of lived experience, etc., end up being better donors because they have some knowledge about what they're giving to and why they're giving to it.
I think on a similar tangent, early than later, financial planning, like estate planning, you get a lot of joy when you not only donate, but you see that time and effort or money being put to use. And so whether it's seeing, kids on a playground, literally, yesterday, or an organization being able to do something at that time, rather than, give it to them when you're gone, there's a lot of psychological benefit on that, in seeing it being used, and when you're still around to see it, right? So do it now, or do it rather than wait, I guess, is a different perspective on the same idea.
I think much the same as what you guys have just said, and my previous comments about the dollar amount doesn't matter, and being on the other side of things too, being kind of part of a charity. We're always fundraising with Rotary. Every little bit matters, and if you think that giving $50 is not enough for them, you're wrong. That they appreciate it. If you buy an item on the auction site of a fundraising auction, and you're only spending $50, they still appreciate that a ton. If that's what you can give, do it, and know that it's appreciated by the other side and wherever that money goes to.
So anyways, yeah, John, Marcus and I are available to answer questions in that nature, but for people who want to get a little bit more information about Charitable Impact directly, where can they find it?
Oh, well, we're online. Look us up at charitableimpact.com. We're on all the social media, social medias that we are charitable. check us out and reach out to us. We're always like today. We love talking about charitable giving and doing so in a donor-centered way.
So when I publish this podcast, there will be a website with some notes from this episode, as well as the links that John just mentioned. And that, if it's easier to remember where to go to, muhs.ca/JSM309 will be the website. And usually I post it a few days after the episode goes live on Spotify. So if it doesn't show up yet, check a couple of days later. And I'll include some other resources on just information on charitable contributions too, so you have some information to go by as well, some research. Well, thanks very much for joining us, John.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed chatting with you guys.
Yeah, this was great.
Thank you again.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Any views discussed in this podcast are those of the presenters or any guests and not necessarily those of Canaccord Genuity Corp. Statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views expressed are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial circumstances, or general needs of any individual, organization, or institution. Investing in equities is not guaranteed, values change frequently, and past performance is not an indicator of future performance. Investors cannot invest directly in an index. Index returns do not reflect any fees, expenses, or sales charges. Please do not hesitate to contact us should you want to know more about anything discussed in this podcast. CG Wealth Management is a division of Canaccord Genuity Corp., member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund and Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization.